Hey everyone, welcome to the Bold and Beautiful 24. I'm Alessio, and I'm so excited to have you here. If you love bold and beautiful, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Alright, let's dive right in.
Lee Finnegan had always lived her life under the strict rules of discipline, logic, and control, but nothing could have prepared her for the suffocating weight of the mess she now found herself tangled in. A mess that was spiraling so fast she felt like every breath she took was borrowed time. And it all came to a breaking point when she realized that her own survival, her reputation as a doctor, her career, and perhaps even her freedom, depended on one unthinkable choice: turning against Luna Nozawa, her own niece, the young woman she had spent years criticizing, warning, and trying to push out of the family circle. And now that choice burned through her like acid because it was a betrayal, but also, in her mind, the only way to survive. She sat in her office late at night with the blinds pulled shut, her phone in her hand, staring at the glowing numbers of the police department line, her fingers trembling over the call button as images of Luna's face, tear-streaked, desperate, but also defiant, flashed in her mind, and she asked herself again and again how it had come to this, how family, love, and loyalty had been reduced to police reports and betrayal. But Lee knew that Luna had become too dangerous. Not just because of the lies and secrets about her pregnancy, not just because of the manipulations that had set Will Spencer, Finn, and even Bill Spencer into chaos, but because Luna, in her blind spiral, had started pulling Lee into her schemes, dragging her name and reputation into the mud. And Lee realized with a sickening thud that if she didn't act now, she'd be the one in handcuffs, she'd be the one losing her license, her hospital privileges, everything she had built from the ground up. So she swallowed the lump in her throat and dialed the number, her voice barely steady as she reported Luna's whereabouts, her suspicions, her accusations, every word tasting like betrayal, but also like a shield against the oncoming storm. And yet, even as she spoke to the officer on the line, a part of her soul screamed that this was wrong, that family should never turn on family, that she was repeating the cycle of abandonment and coldness she had once sworn never to perpetuate. But fear was louder than guilt, fear of losing her career, fear of being exposed as complicit in Luna's lies, fear of Finn looking at her with disappointment instead of respect, fear of Steffi, Ridge, Brooke, Bill, all of them whispering her name with disgust. And so she pushed her emotions down and reported Luna, giving addresses, details, everything she could, painting a picture of a dangerous young woman who needed to be stopped before she destroyed even more lives. And in that moment, Lee's heart cracked because she knew she wasn't just calling the police on Luna. She was severing something that could never be repaired. She was choosing herself over family, and that choice, though it might protect her career and keep her from going down with Luna, would haunt her in ways she couldn't yet imagine, because Luna wasn't the kind of woman to go quietly. She wasn't the type to forget a betrayal like this. And as the police took notes and reassured Lee that they would look into the matter, Lee hung up the phone and sat in the silence of her office, her breath uneven, her eyes stinging, her mind racing through every possible fallout. Finn finding out and calling her heartless, Luna screaming her name as she was dragged into custody, Bill Spencer storming into her office demanding answers, Poppy collapsing in disbelief that her sister could do such a thing. And most of all, the sick knowledge that Lee had crossed a line she could never uncross. For once you invite the police into family matters, you can never go back to keeping secrets within the bloodline. And the world would soon know not just Luna's sins, but Lee's desperation, her willingness to sacrifice family to protect herself, and that chilling truth, that Lee had chosen survival over loyalty, would echo through every corner of her life, leaving her to wonder if saving herself had come at the unbearable cost of losing everyone who ever mattered. Lee sat back in her chair, the leather cold against her skin, and tried to breathe, but each inhale seemed to tighten the knot in her chest, as if the very air around her conspired to remind her of the enormity of what she had done. And she found herself replaying every interaction she had had with Luna over the past months. The sly smiles, the whispered lies, the moments when Luna had edged too close to revealing truths that could destroy the Finnegan name. The times when Lee had tried to set boundaries and Luna had pushed back with that unnerving combination of innocence and cunning that made it impossible to tell when the girl was sincere or when she was calculating. And as Lee thought about those moments, she realized with a sinking feeling that she had underestimated Luna. That every warning she had given to Finn, every quiet caution to Bill, every subtle attempt to steer the young woman away from the chaos she was creating had been ignored or manipulated, twisted into some convoluted scheme that left Lee in the crossfire. And now here she was, sitting in the aftermath of her own decision to call the police, knowing that the repercussions would not be contained, that one phone call could not undo months of deception. And the more she thought about it, the more she felt as though she were standing at the edge of a precipice with the ground crumbling beneath her feet, because Luna was not just a threat to her safety or her career. She was a threat to the stability of everything Lee had worked for, to the delicate equilibrium of her family, to the fragile trust Finn still held in her, and even to the reputation she had painstakingly built in the medical community. And yet as much as she tried to justify her actions to herself, the guilt gnawed at her relentlessly, a ceaseless, whispering reminder that she had traded loyalty for self-preservation. And somewhere in the quiet of her office, Lee could almost hear Luna's voice, a haunting echo of the girl's defiance, accusing her of betrayal, daring her to face the consequences. And Lee had no answer, no defense, only the cold, hard reality that she had made a choice and now had to live with it. Even as she thought about Luna, Lee could not escape the cascading chaos she imagined unfolding. Finn walking into the room and seeing the police report, his eyes wide with disbelief and hurt, demanding answers that she was too afraid to give. Bill Spencer's voice, booming through her mind, threatening lawsuits, hospital investigations, public exposure. Bill, who had a history of never forgiving perceived weakness or betrayal, and Lee knew that once he found out, she would have to steel herself for a barrage of anger and interrogation. Each word from him cutting sharper than any knife. Ridge and Brooke, who had always viewed Lee with a mix of suspicion and condescension, would see this as proof of her willingness to undermine family, proof that Lee was someone who put her own interests above everyone else. And she could already picture the whispers in hallways, the pointed glances at hospital board meetings, the questions from colleagues who would never fully understand the pressures she was under, and it all pressed down on her chest like a lead weight, making her feel simultaneously small and exposed. A woman who had acted out of fear but now had to pretend that fear had been wisdom. And in the midst of this mental storm, Lee imagined Luna herself, being taken into custody, her face twisted with fury and betrayal, promising silently, through clenched teeth and defiant eyes, that Lee would pay, that the consequences would come in ways Lee could not yet anticipate, that revenge was not just a possibility but a certainty. And Lee shivered at the thought, feeling the cold fingers of dread wrap around her heart, because she knew Luna was smart, cunning, and relentless. And even behind bars, Luna would find a way to turn the tables, to make Lee's life a living hell. And that knowledge was almost worse than the guilt, almost worse than the fear of public exposure, because it reminded Lee that actions have consequences, and sometimes the consequences cannot be controlled or predicted, no matter how careful or clever one believes oneself to be. As Lee sat there, the room around her seemed to shrink, the walls closing in with the oppressive weight of anticipation and regret. And she thought about her own motherly instincts, the instincts that had always driven her to protect Finn, to guide him, to shield him from the dangers of the world. And yet she had just crossed a line that Finn might never forgive, and the thought of his disappointment cut deeper than any reprimand she could imagine, deeper than any professional consequence, because it was personal, it was intimate, and it struck at the very core of who Lee was. She realized, with a mix of shame and cold clarity, that she had placed herself above the family she loved, above the principles she once held dear. And for what? Self-preservation, safety, the illusion of control, a hope that by reporting Luna she could contain the chaos rather than become a victim of it herself. But the irony was bitter. In seeking to protect herself, she had created a storm that would engulf her anyway. A storm fueled by anger, betrayal, and vengeance, and no one, not the police, not Finn, not Bill, not Ridge or Brooke, could stop it now, because once actions are set in motion, they gather momentum of their own, like a snowball rolling down a mountain, and Lee was painfully aware that this particular snowball would crush everything in its path, including her. And then there was the gnawing, almost unbearable thought that had been with her since she first picked up the phone. That Luna would never forgive her, that the niece she had once attempted to guide, to mentor, to correct, would see Lee's actions as a profound, irredeemable betrayal, and that thought lingered in her mind, festering, turning into a cold, sharp dread that she could not shake because Luna's intellect, her manipulative brilliance, meant that she would not simply accept defeat. She would plot, she would wait, she would ensnare, and Lee, who had spent a lifetime thinking herself capable of managing crises, now felt powerless, exposed, vulnerable in ways that no hospital emergency room or family drama could have ever prepared her for. And she realized, with a clarity that was almost horrifying, that reporting Luna was not a resolution. It was an escalation, a declaration of war in a battle that Lee could never fully predict or control. And yet, paradoxically, it was the only choice she had felt she could make, the only way to ensure that she remained standing when the dust settled, even if it meant that she would stand alone, with the weight of guilt, fear, and anticipated retaliation pressing down on her like an unrelenting tide, a tide that threatened to pull her under at any moment. Lee felt the room spinning around her. Though the blinds remained firmly shut and the night outside was quiet, it was as if the chaos she had unleashed had seeped into the very walls, pressing against her, whispering accusations that she could not silence, and she thought of Finnegan, his trusting eyes, the way he had always leaned on her guidance, always assumed she would do the right thing, and now, with that simple, decisive phone call to the police, she had irrevocably altered the course of his life as well as her own, a fact that gnawed at her conscience in relentless waves. She imagined Finn discovering the report, piecing together her involvement, confronting her with hurt, anger, disbelief, and perhaps even disgust, and she could almost hear his voice, low, tight with tension, asking her why she had done it, why she had chosen her own safety over the family they both loved, and Lee's throat constricted because she knew there would be no satisfactory answer, no way to explain the terror and the desperation that had driven her to this point without admitting how powerless she felt, how trapped she had been, and how desperately she had clung to self-preservation in a way that felt both instinctive and horrifyingly selfish. And as that thought settled in, she felt an icy chill sweep over her. A reminder that Luna Nozawa was not a person who would simply accept her fate quietly, that the young woman she had tried to counsel, reprimand, and control would now see Lee's actions as a personal attack, a betrayal that demanded retribution, and the knowledge of Luna's potential for vengeance, for manipulative, calculated, unrelenting payback, sent a tremor through Lee's body, making her hands shake despite the calm facade she tried so hard to maintain. And she realized that reporting Luna had not ended the danger. It had transformed it, amplified it, made it a living thing that would hunt her, encircle her, and wait for the perfect moment to strike, and that awareness was suffocating, leaving Lee simultaneously relieved and terrified, caught in a paradox where safety and fear existed in the same instant, intertwined so tightly she could barely tell where one ended and the other began. She thought about Bill Spencer, the man whose temper and intensity had always been a source of unease for her. She imagined the look on his face when he learned that Lee had called the police, the booming voice, the sharp questions, the way he would demand that she justify her actions, the sheer force of his presence pressing down on her as he interrogated her not just about Luna's behavior, but about her own motives. Lee felt a sinking dread because Bill did not forgive easily, and any perception of weakness, indecision, or betrayal would be weaponized against her in ways she could not fully predict. She could see Ridge and Brooke, both of whom had long memories and subtle cunning, hearing of the incident and immediately forming judgments, connecting dots that might not exist but which would damage Lee's standing in the family and social circles, turning the Finnegan name into a subject of gossip, speculation, and mistrust, and Lee shivered because she knew how damaging that could be, how fast whispers in Los Angeles could grow into a chorus of condemnation that left a person isolated, scrutinized, and vilified. And yet, at the same time, she had no illusions about Luna herself. She was smart, resourceful, and unrelenting. And Lee knew the young woman would plot, silently, carefully, ensuring that every slight, every perceived betrayal, would be remembered, catalogued, and used as ammunition in a future confrontation that Lee could not predict, could not control, and the more she thought about Luna's capability for manipulation, the more the fear settled in her chest like a stone, heavy, immovable, a constant pressure that reminded her she had just made herself a target, a chess piece in Luna's inevitable game of revenge. Lee's mind flashed to Poppy, her other niece, who had always been more idealistic, more trusting, and Lee imagined the heartbreak on her face, the disbelief that Lee could do something so drastic, the tears that would follow, the questions about loyalty, family, and morality, and she felt a pang of guilt sharper than anything she had experienced in years because Poppy had always looked to her as an anchor, as someone who would protect and guide, and now Lee had subverted that. And yet, paradoxically, Lee knew that this action, reporting Luna, was necessary. She reminded herself again, trying to cling to rationality, that Luna had become increasingly unpredictable, manipulative, and dangerous, that the young woman's lies, her half-truths, and the destabilization she had caused in Finn, Will, and even Bill's life were escalating at a pace Lee could not stop, that if she did not act, she herself would be drawn into Luna's schemes, her reputation ruined, her career jeopardized, and perhaps worst of all, her own sense of safety shattered, leaving her vulnerable in ways that could not be measured, anticipated, or repaired. She had tried reasoning, negotiating, subtle warnings, emotional appeals, even quiet interventions, but Luna had shrugged off each attempt, twisting her words, evading the boundaries Lee had set, and in the end, Lee understood that there was no alternative, that survival sometimes demanded betrayal, that protecting herself required a sacrifice she would never have imagined making, and that realization was suffocating because it collided violently with her instincts as a mother, as a Finnegan, as someone who valued family above almost everything else. Yet there it was, undeniable and cruel in its clarity. Lee's thoughts spiraled further, imagining the fallout in painstaking detail. The confrontation with Finn, whose anger might turn to cold disappointment. The whispers among colleagues that could tarnish her reputation for years. The subtle but sharp judgment of Ridge and Brooke, whose perception of her could shift permanently. The potential for Luna, even from a distance, to weave schemes that ensnared her once again. The tension and fear that would now saturate every interaction, every meeting, every family gathering, transforming her life into a minefield of suspicion, retaliation, and unrelenting scrutiny. She pictured Luna's eyes, burning with a mix of hurt and fury, as she processed the betrayal, calculating the perfect moment to exact revenge, and Lee shivered knowing that no one, not law enforcement, not family, not even careful avoidance, could fully protect her from what was coming, because Luna's intelligence, her resourcefulness, her relentless drive to balance the scales of perceived justice, made her unpredictable and dangerous in ways Lee had only begun to comprehend. And the anticipation of that storm left her both terrified and immobilized, trapped in a cage of her own making, wondering if she had truly acted in self-preservation, or merely postponed the inevitable reckoning that now loomed closer than ever. Lee's mind, once a sanctuary of logic and calm, now felt like a battlefield strewn with the debris of every choice she had ever made, every warning she had ever ignored in herself, every moment she had failed to prepare for a storm like this, and she thought back to Luna's earliest signs of manipulation, the subtle ways she had tested boundaries, the small lies that seemed harmless at first but had grown into a tangled web of deceit, the whispered half-truths to Will, the insinuations to Finn, the way she had subtly undermined Bill's authority, and Lee realized with a mix of dread and bitter clarity that she had been blind, that she had underestimated Luna's cunning and intelligence, that she had thought morality, reason, and family loyalty would be enough to restrain the young woman, when in fact they had only made her predictable, only made it easier for Luna to manipulate her. And that realization was like a knife twisting in her chest because it meant that this phone call to the police, though necessary, was also an admission of failure, a tacit acknowledgement that Lee's guidance had been ineffective, that her instincts had not been sharp enough, and that the chaos she now faced was, in part, the result of her own miscalculations, and that self-awareness only magnified the fear gnawing at her. She remembered the countless moments she had tried to reason with Luna, the gentle warnings, the attempts to instill responsibility, the subtle guidance toward honesty, each attempt rebuffed with a smile, a shrug, or a clever deflection. And she realized that those small rejections, as trivial as they had seemed at the time, had been the first warnings of the larger storm to come, the hints of a personality so determined, so unyielding, that it would not stop until it had. She thought of Finn, her son, the boy she had raised with care, love, and unshakable standards, and the thought of his inevitable disappointment made her chest tighten until it felt impossible to breathe. She could already imagine him confronting her, anger flashing in his eyes, his voice trembling with hurt, asking her how she could turn against Luna, how she could call the police on someone who was family, someone who was vulnerable, someone who had looked to her.